Good morning. Now, I have to admit the title is a bit on the embarrassingly egocentric side, but let me dwell on it for a second, because I think it's our factual starting point. Now, what is that relationship between the car, myself, and the environment? I think, I like people who, before they act, think, and before they think, perceive. And that's usually how driving a car should happen for most of us. You see what's happening outside, you think what you want to do with it, you grab the controls, and you tell the car what to do. That's auto driving for all brands. Now, there's one specialty on the BMW side for us. One other channel is important, and that channel is that really we'd like to feel the road on the one hand, and the car is really there to extend your physical capabilities. It's kind of an exoskeleton, really. And by that, we want as little lost in translation in both directions between you and the road. So is that car really a separate something? No, it's not. It's part of yourself. That's our, for decades, we've been building on this theme. And now there's a problem. The problem is that autonomous cars become real, and that's the end of our brand. I don't think it is, and let me tell you a little bit more about it, but I'll try to move away a little bit from that egocentric view that I started off with. Now, become real is kind of a boring theme. I don't see anybody yawning, but everybody says this. And the center of the debate is always the when exactly. There's science projects on the one hand, there's serious efforts on the other hand. Most companies put thousands of people into it. We put about 1,000 into it. And for us, it's going to be real in about 2021. And real meaning, it's a product that doesn't just try to grab the headlines. It's a product that tries to serve you. And the interesting question, though, is not that, is it 20 or is it 21? It's the how. And let me dive briefly into what really is automated driving, a little bit on the technical side, and then move away from that again. Now, automated driving, first, if you look at a car, it ought to look pretty normal. That is a car with stacks of sensors, most of them really hidden underneath. It's the body parts and the windscreen. It's radars, cameras, LiDARs, looking in all sorts of directions. And those are there in order to perceive what's outside. Now, all that data, and that's a lot of data, that's gigabytes per second, that's getting chewed up by strong visual processing units, and then it's handled by computers that do the reasoning. Now, if you think I'm going on to kind of tech boast here, I think I'll have to veer off that track because that's not enough. That's not going to do the job. A car like this, a standalone device, is still pretty short-sighted. Now, let me show you 3 examples why that is the case. Imagine yourself trying to manage that intersection on the left-hand side. Now, imagine that intersection not to be as clean as it seems here, but cluttered with trucks, a little bit of bad weather. Your vision obscured. It's very hard to make out the nature of that intersection and how to manage it if you really just have that vantage point of that car. If you want to know what lanes to take to change to, can you do a left turn on this lane? What really is the relationship between traffic lights and lanes? And when's that traffic light turning red that I'm heading towards? All those questions are very hard to answer just from onboard sensors, and that's why we need high-definition maps. Now, that still is a little bit the boring side of it. The intriguing side is, the live bit. It's very well to have a map that's very accurate, but how up-to-date is it? And in order to handle that problem, what we do is, from 2018 onwards, a lot of our cars, and that's 3 years before the data I just gave you, a lot of our cars will actually be surveying vehicles. Using the onboard sensors for the driver assistance system, they will actually be measuring whether that map they have is still the same or whether it needs changing. So that map, in that sense, becomes self-healing. And that's got to be done before you launch the first fully autonomous car. Next one, imagine yourself you want to go to the theater. And when we talk about automated driving, we don't just mean, kind of taking care of the steering wheel. What we do mean is get me to the theater. Now, that has two levels of planning. The first question is that we all have is, where do we leave the car? So parking is something, is a non-trivial task, and what we have to know is how full is this parking lot? Is there an opportunity for roadside parking? And again, if we don't do this, then you have to change the destination of the car all the time, and you're busy by trying to tell the car where to go. Here, for example, what you see is a map that shows you in blue colors where you're likely to find a parking spot, where not. And the way we do this is actually by crowdsourcing and building models that actually predict where that next parking spot will be, and then change the destination automatically so that the car's going to get there. Last one, that's on the serious side. It's all very well to have this map, but still, it's really important to know what hazards are ahead of that car. That fog which is over there, that heavy rain, that icy patch on the bridge crossing that river on a cold Sunday morning. And therefore, it's really important to have a live, sophisticated local hazard warning. We're building this today. Why are we building this today? And you can actually buy today because we think this has to be really mature for 21. Now, just taking these three examples, it really means what you need to move beyond the car. That individual car is not bright enough. It'll never do it. What you need is effectively a view from the crowd of all those cars. And therefore, if you look at that car, it's not enough. What's required is more an ecosystem of automated driving. What's required is really that car talking to all sorts of services, giving it that element of foresight that you really need. Now, how to do that? If you look at this map, this is a map of Europe. And what you see are basically, this is a live map, real data of BMWs driving across Europe. And those BMWs try to basically look for stuff that's interesting. And using mobile networks, they send just the tiny fractions of stuff that are interesting. They send it up to basically a computer. The one we have on the right-hand side is Mare Nostrum, wonderful thing. I thought this is a nice picture for DLT because it kind of crosses the bridge between high-tech on the one hand and religion on the other hand. Somebody had this idea to put it in a church in Barcelona. And what it shows that we do really need fairly heavy compute in order to do that off-board intelligence that is required. Now, the other thing we need, though, I think, I said, hey, this is all BMW data, but quite frankly, this is not enough. I think what we do need, and that's a kind of collective thing I'm urging us for, is we do need a fair and liquid data economy that allows a lot of sharing that data, because we don't want to monopolize knowing where a dangerous spot is. Now, once we have those two elements, that fairly intelligent car and that very dominant intelligence which is sitting off-board and trying to understand dangers, map updates, and so forth, that car is changing. I started off with that exoskeleton. Is it still an exoskeleton? I don't think so, because really, if that car can do what you want it to do, then it has to have more foresight than you as a driver, more anticipation. There's got to be some magic to it. And also, it has to do clever things which are not trivial to follow. And therefore, I think our relationship to that car, that image of that exoskeleton, that just doesn't work anymore. That car becomes somewhat enigmatic sometimes. It becomes surprising, pleasantly surprising. But it's not, it's not that straight machine anymore, and it's important to rethink our relationship to that car. And that leads me to the core, what really is our relationship to the car? What does it mean for the human-machine interface? What I think, I'm taking a leap of faith here at this and moving away from that image of that exoskeleton and moving away to the image of a horse. Now, that horse, if you think about that that well-educated horse, that horse that has a good and stable character, that horse that has some degree of intelligence, then that horse does a lot of things that we expect from cars in the future. If you're tired during the afternoon, you would expect the horse to actually get you home safely, comfortably, not at breakneck speed. On the other hand, if you tell the horse to jump over that fence, you want it to do just that without any hesitation. If you want it to go around that tree now, it should do it and respond to the slightest movement of your body. But it does imply for your relationship, I think, for our relationship, that we have to. The horse does not come with a manual, does it? So how do we learn how to use that horse, how to relate to that horse? One thing is, and let me take the analogy here, one thing really is you have to build trust to that horse. And trust building usually is done by trying to understand how somebody else perceives and how that person thinks. Now, there's a lot of us, also in the digital scene, who don't have that capability, but I think it really helps to relate to other people, to get to know how they think. Second one is, if information is just conveyed by one of those terrible message queues we're being hit with, graphical message queues, that's not going to do the purpose of automated driving. You just sit there like in a tram, and at the same time, it hammers you with the messages, what it's supposed to do in the next step. Is that the product you want to have? I don't think so. I think also it's important to acknowledge that when automatic driving becomes real, that it's not snip here and everywhere. Automated driving will be covered road by road, and you'll use the same product a lot of times in kind of partially automated mode. And therefore, information needs to be conveyed subtly, selectively, and very intuitively. The third one is, our brains have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to relate to animals, and that space in our beings is very much unused. We don't see animals in our daily lives anymore, and that mental space, that space of perception, can be used in order to build better HMIs for cars. Let me take one brief example. If that car wants to convey to you that it has perceived a danger ahead, if you let it just gently hit the brake, then this will be a signal to you that everybody of us perceives, like with a driver, with a natural driver, hey, wake up, there might be something ahead. And it's those little signals where we can learn a lot from nature and our relationship to animals that help us. Now, what shape could this take in cars? Augmented reality, and in our view, is certainly going to be a major part of it. It's part of flying. It hasn't gained traction in consumer, but maybe really the car is the next space where augmented reality is becoming useful. Why? Because if you look at this car, you can see what the car sees. You can also see what the car anticipates to do next. You get a very natural relationship to what the next maneuvers will be, and then you won't be surprised, and gradually, without even learning that very consciously, gradually, I believe that you'll get to know the car, how it behaves, and that really is important. Next one, if you think about how visual cues are being given, then again, that trend to bigger displays, that in a way, I think that's a bit of a dead end, that's too simple. I think it's putting information where it ought to be, putting information when you really need it, rather than having this kind of huge no-red control room in your car cluttered with information you just don't want. We believe that most of the time you drive a car, you want to be left in peace. And just when it's necessary and where it's necessary, you ought to see what's relevant. Now that was kind of one direction only. That's the direction when the car's talking to you. But sometimes that car wants a response. For example, there's this message hitting you, And when automated driving becomes real, we hit one problem. And that problem is that I'm a big believer in speech. I've pushed speech into our cars over the past 10 years. And that speech by now is very natural, and I think it works pretty well. But there's one situation where it doesn't work at all when I talk to you, and suddenly this car starts interrupting our conversation. And then to turn my attention to the car, then start talking to the car, that's messy. And therefore, alternative ways, multimodal ways, where you can mix conversation to interrelate with other people in the car on the one hand, and also the car itself are important. One way, for example, to do it is I'm not a believer in gestures in general as the unique way of interaction. I think gestures are okay if you have to overcome a problem like you cannot speak, but the natural way is to use gestures in order to support speech. And for example, if you look at this, then if there's a call coming from my wife, it's even while I'm talking, it's easy to accept. It's casual. I can do it in parallel. If it's a call from my boss, then I can have this wonderful emotional gesture to generously say that I don't want to talk to him and let my wife know, sitting next to me, that she matters more to me. That's, for example, practical stuff you can buy today, but I think the secret for the future is really to produce that amalgamate of gesture, augmented reality, gaze, and speech that effectively, if you come to think about it, you do have with a horse too. You do use all the channels in relating to an animal, and that's why I think that mental model of an animal is actually quite helpful to say, we need to build that relationship, HMI-wise, to the car. Now, if we come back to that original picture, it was that exoskeleton. And building an HMI for exoskeletons really means tightness, tight control, no loss of communication in either direction. Now, I think the two things that I'd like to wrap up with that really need to change, and that's not just a BMW thing, I think that's more a kind of societal thing, is on the one hand, that you need to build trust, and the car will become a bit of an animal, a reliable animal, an animal with character, an animal that serves, but that trust building to that somewhat intelligent animal, although it won't it won't win the Nobel Prize, that's core at building automotive HMIs. The second thing is that this notion of my car full stop, that's over. Cars, when they are autonomous cars, will become swarm-like beings, and a lot of the intelligence will actually be sitting in the cloud. A lot of the data will be crowdsourced, and therefore sharing that data and making it a somewhat societal ideal to do that and not to monopolize data and to sit on data that could save lives for other people. I think that's another key thing. And that's not just helpful for 2021. I think to build that value, to avoid accidents, to make life easier by finding that parking spot, by not going around the block for hours, getting on other people's nerves, that can be done today. And that's why I believe that our road to automated driving really starts by sharing a lot of data, making that data accessible, creating marketplaces that then allow anybody, not just BMW, to build services that are innovative and improve lives. Thanks, everybody.